my name is Guillaume and I'm the CEO of Airline Selection Program, a company that focuses on helping you succeed at airline selections. In this video, I'm going to explain to you how a selection committee works and what can happen at management level when times change. We were in February 2003. I had trained and prepared like crazy for my first selection, Air France. I had prepared in the same way that I teach today in Advanced Interview Course version 2 when it comes to knowing the airline. I had read the 2 last annual reports, spoken with numerous pilots who explained to me the reality of their work. One of them spent an hour with me talking about the recent history of Air France, its successes and challenges. At that time, Air France was growing after the development of the Charles de Gaulle hub. The recovery plan initiated by Christian Blanc and continued by Jean-Cyril Spinetta was in full bloom. My friend explained to me how the hub worked, the advantages of Charles de Gaulle compared to other airports such as London Heathrow that were more congested, and the challenges that the airline was facing. These were mainly internal dissatisfactions, but also it was about profitability, as growth could not continue forever and the cost base was quite high. You see that even back then, I was analyzing my target airline very well, and this point, my preparation has never really changed because it was winning from the start. I would reproduce the same strategy at BA a couple of years later, studying the airline in detail and speaking with a couple of pilots. They told me of the upcoming challenges, which in this case was the arrival of a new CEO, Willie Walsh. I was able to elaborate on that at the interview and it was very well perceived indeed. Now back to my first selection with Air France. I spent money on psychometric prep. We prepared on paper in those days with large binders. It was quite involving. I prepared properly and passed this part of the assessment. I prepared for the interview in a specialized center that still exists today under a different name. Sadly, this center would not teach me very much that was useful. Some generic advice on body language, the overall sequence of the group interview, the fact that you must speak and let others speak as well, maybe catch up someone who is in difficulty. Very, very generic advice. Nothing about the company, nothing about the profession, nothing about the key skills, the key competency, nothing about the link between the personality questionnaire that they were already doing in those days and the difficult questions. Nothing about how to talk about weaknesses, nothing about how to lead the recruiter to fertile ground for speaking of your experiences. They didn't tell me about the recruiter's techniques, who asks difficult questions when you're tired at the end of the interview, and that you need to stay focused until the last minute and not ask unnecessary questions that could prolong the interview in the end. Nothing either about not mistaking the friendly nature of the recruiters with being able to tell them just about everything. Nothing about intellectual honesty, its limits in an interview context, which is the subject of another video that I invite you to watch as well if you haven't already done so. Lack of good training for airline selections and interviews in general still today, 20 years later, is the reason why I created Airline Selection Program and our most important course, Advanced Interview Course, now in version 2. None of us will be hired that week in mid-February 2003, nor do I believe that month. To me, they will say that I confessed a weakness during the group exercise. Others will be given other reasons. The selections would resume gradually, the company fearing having to give priority to Air Liberté pilots as the airline had gone bankrupt the week of my selection. And they feared that the state, who was a shareholder in Air France, a main shareholder in Air France in those days, were going to force them to interview those pilots first, and that the pilots union would be doing the same. Also, they had some military pilots that were on a separate list that they also had to interview, and some internal candidates that could no longer wait. All in all, they decided to stop professional selections, meaning selections for pilots who already had a CPL, IR, and MCC, and were basically ready for employment. They halted that for a little while until they could gather their breath and know how many of those Air Liberté pilots they were going to have to interview and at what rhythm. What I'm trying to explain here is that even a company like Air France that does its best to provide an ethical and fair selection environment sometimes responds to internal or external constraints that mean that it could certainly recruit fewer of a certain type of profiles. It would be the same for British Airways, for Lufthansa, for any airline for that matter. So what you expect and the way you expect to be treated in terms of fairness for the amount of work you've done to prepare might not reflect in what the airline can actually take at that time. Air France is one of the only airlines who debrief, but it's very valuable to everyone watching this video because these debriefings give us a sort of reason why the airline is not taking someone which could be valid at another airline. So what they often tell people is, we did not quite perceive your motivation. It's very hard. It's very hard to hear that as a pilot, especially when you've been dreaming of entering this major airline, your flagship carrier, since you were a little boy or a little girl. And you've sacrificed so much of your time, so much of your money or your family's money, only to be told that you are not motivated enough. When you hear this, you probably actually did a good selection. It's just something else has happened. And you will get another chance. In my case, when my turn came again, which was 2 years later, I had already been at British Airways for about a year. And I'd been through so many adversities, I could not fathom the idea of going through selection again. So I did not present the Air France selection. I mean, I was going to have 1 year of seniority when this reapplying was possible. And at that time, you had to wait 2 more years before you'd get invited again. And 1 more year before you'd get integrated. I was going to already be on long haul by that time, or very close to. It didn't make sense. In the end, it was a mistake because I didn't realize at the time that I would need to come back to France later in my life. And even if I hadn't moved to Dubai, staying in the UK would have been difficult on the long term. Even if it's close to France, at the end of the day, I kind of need to be in France right now, look after family and stuff like that. These are things that you don't quite measure when you're a little bit younger, but I invite you, if you're younger, to not expatriate yourself too far without having a lifeline back to your country. Whatever the case, I didn't reapply, and I subsequently went to Emirates, as you know. And I became a recruiter at Emirates fairly quickly after joining Emirates. I think I was about a year and a half a co-pilot because I had this motivation for selection and this fascination for selections because I studied them so much after what happened to me at Air France to understand what had happened and how to never reproduce that mistake. Well, they took me in the recruitment team and I was so happy about that. Now at Emirates, we frequently changed the prerequisites. This was done by the director of pilot recruitment in direct link with the vice president and director of operations. Together, they would define the recruitment goals. Depending on how many airplanes were coming, how many people were planned to leave. They had statistical models about that. It was all very interesting. And so sometimes the recruitment prerequisites would be lowered to accommodate more pilots. For instance, at some point, we went from 4,000 flying hours to 2,500 flying hours as the minimum requirement in order to have more candidates to call. In that case, flight training would get involved. It was so interesting because then they would have a say on the simulator exercise that had to be run during selection. They would make it more accessible without reducing the quality. Everything was fine-tuned in a really rather impressive way, I must say. Later, people who'd flown turboprops were also accepted, which never happened before. And again, everything changed to loosen the recruitment without changing any demands on key skills. A stronger focus was put on basic piloting and a very big focus was placed on psychometrics and on the interview part. And sometimes the recruitments were, instead of being loosened, they would be tightened. There was one point in 2017, 2 incidents, one after the other, caused a lot of internal noise. There was no real consequence or large media coverage, but management did not appreciate it and everything was tightened. This was the year that I became a captain and I was lucky to pass just before. Following these incidents, for instance, a co-pilot with an average grade below 4 in the last 4 sims in the last 2 years, preceding the upgrade, would see their upgrade be more or less blocked. Instructors were a bit more severe in their grading for a few months. I personally didn't have any problems. First of all, I passed before things got tightened, but I also had a pretty smooth upgrade. 1 or 2 of my batchmates didn't have a completely smooth upgrade. They had a little blip at some point, a sim that didn't go perfect, so they had to resit that sim. Because it happened before the tightening of everything, no issues. But if that had happened after the new rules, things could have changed for them. What you must understand, therefore, is that there are some internal pressures that you might not be able to anticipate at all as a candidate. As you approach the selection building, everything's fine, the news are fine, the economy is growing, and there's something that happened inside, which means that they're slowing down recruitment for one reason or another. During this period of tightening at Emirates, following these 2 incidents that happened internally, this tightening of requirements came down to recruitment. The exercises of recruitment were toughened and the minimum grade to pass was increased a lot. During this reflection phase, they almost stopped recruitment. Pretty much like what happened with Air Liberté in my days at Air France. Put yourself in the vice president's shoes, though. He was upset to learn about these incidents and decided to stop recruitment more or less for a month, time to see more clearly and to have a new strategy and to see where the mistakes were. He thinks that if these incidents happened, it was probably due to an internal problem, or maybe there was something on the line of training. Maybe it was a lack of communication. Maybe it was excessive fatigue on those crews, or combination of all that, or maybe it was just bad luck. Could it be something that could be prevented? Should it be prevented at recruitment? It could be due to recruitment errors. So everybody would take a breather so that we would refine and take this into account and create a better process on which the airline could grow again. He was going to therefore launch an audit, and this audit was going to take around a month. In the meantime, from his point of view, he would prefer not to recruit at all, or almost, for a little while. Not for too long, because of course the growth need was still there and paramount, but for a little while. During this month, and whilst waiting for the creation of the new scenarios and all the other requirements, they were going to increase the minimum required grade. So the few people who were invited still came in, But for them, the selection was, they would only pass if they would be hyper good. And then there was also the backlog of people who had not yet been given their answer. There were sort of put through committee again. And in order to see if they were really, really good, if there was any risk at all, then they would not pass. So people who were about to pass were actually failed and told to come back. So during this period, they only hired pilots who not only had a very high score, but also made no mistakes whatsoever, raised no doubts at any point. Let's just say that it was not the same context as if they came just a month before. I owe a lot, as you know, to the fact that Air France debriefed me when it was my time. The person who debriefed me on that day was able to reassure me and tell me that I had not missed by much, which later was proven because I managed to get into a major airline and one more major airline after that. I explained this already in other videos. But the reason I'm mentioning Air France again here is that he told me that the bankruptcy of Air Liberté meant that they expected to receive demands from the state. He said that to me, and that they expected to have to put these pilots quickly through selection, and that therefore they had to temporarily stop or greatly slow down the professional channel. He said it to me in sort of a series of half words that he was really a very nice person, and he didn't want me to leave discouraged, and he told me the truth. And essentially he told me, we are recruiting and we're a recruitment department, but we are in the frame of an airline that has an internal and an external reality. We aim to give the best chance to everyone, but we remain a company with its needs and sometimes its constraints. It's not a perfect system. That day, I understood that airlines respond to internal and external factors, like I said, and that as a candidate, I cannot control everything. If you felt it went well, it probably did. And if you're lucky enough to go to an airline that will give you a debriefing, it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. You will have to move on, and you will have to look forward to the next selection. If you have prepared well, and with Advanced Interview Course version 2, your chances of success are high, and you have all the decoding keys. In life, we never have an obligation of a result, even if we would like to have this result. We do, however, always have an obligation of means. On this basis, you can sleep peacefully. The message here is to prepare yourself, but also to never delay a selection, a major airline selection, such as British Airways, Air France, or Lufthansa, a defining selection in your life. You don't wait, especially now that they're all recruiting massively in proportions never seen since the 1970s. You never know what might happen tomorrow. You never know when the requirements might tighten for something completely out of your control. You never know when this growth period we have now is going to have an inflection. So don't waste a minute. Apply for the selections that are defining to you and give it your all. Do what is necessary, and if you don't have a type rating, when it is now a tacit prerequisite, I recommend that you adapt to the market and get this type rating as soon as you can, which will open so many doors for you. I too had to pay for my type rating, and without it, no first job, no 400 hours of jet time, no British Airways. I don't know if I would have ever had the career I had at all, or if I would ever have flown a long-haul plane. Type rating at a growing market is a good calculation. Don't delay your chance at any major airline. Some people recently in the process at Air France who didn't have a type rating asked to postpone for some reason, and they now find themselves in this terrible situation where the prerequisites have changed, and now they no longer meet the new criteria, and the company is not going to know what to do with them. More than likely, they're going to adjourn them. It is sad. Don't put yourself in this position. If you're invited for a selection, put all the odds in your favor. Preparation starts now. Start immersing yourself in recruitment skills. So by tomorrow, you will have matured all of this and it will all become natural. Your flight school probably didn't teach you any of the concepts that I teach you here on this channel in our free courses and in Advanced Interview Course version 2. You need training that addresses selection from the inside and with sufficient granularity. You need it to succeed. In Advanced Interview Course version 2, we explain so many things. The key competencies, how our recruitment department works, how to analyze an airline. Advanced Interview Course allows you to understand with specific examples the operational logic of decisions at the level of a captain and what is expected of a co-pilot, the limits of SOPs, the difference of their use at pre-flight and after departure. The course explains CRM in a practical way using an intervention models that will help you a lot in your career. It also talks, amongst other things, about workload management. It gives you especially access to a personality questionnaire and explains in detail how to answer difficult questions. Whether you have an advanced interview, which is the case at major airlines, a hybrid, which is used by many large low-cost airlines, or a classic interview. You can find details of our courses in the description. Connect with us on WhatsApp and Discord, where you can exchange with others on all airlines presently recruiting. And if this video was useful to you, don't hesitate to give us a like and subscribe to our channel. See you soon on Discord and inside Advanced Interview Course.